Imagine waking one day to find your emotional spectrum has collapsed, leaving only a single feeling to define every moment. This isn't merely the suppression of other emotions, it's their complete eradication, meaning perceptions, memories, and even future anticipations are filtered through this singular lens. If that single emotion were, say, pure joy, every sunrise, every meal, every conversation would be interpreted as overwhelmingly delightful. Yet this constant elation paradoxically diminishes its meaning when there's no contrasting sorrow or boredom to provide context. The brain's limbic system, typically a complex orchestra of fluctuating states, now plays a monotonous, unending note, affecting not just internal experience, but also how we interact with external stimuli. A world without the subtle cues of frustration or curiosity becomes profoundly alien, rendering the rich tapestry of human interaction into a bland, predictable pattern. The ability to discern danger or feel empathy becomes distorted. Without fear, caution disappears entirely, and without sadness, the suffering of others elicits no compassionate response, reshaping the very fabric of personal identity and moral reasoning. Even basic decision-making, deeply intertwined with emotional assessment, fundamentally changes its underlying logic. Consider the specifics. What if pure, unadulterated joy became your sole emotional state? Initially, this might sound utopian, a constant bliss that removes all suffering. Yet true happiness often derives its potency from its ephemerality, its contrast with less pleasant experiences. A perpetually joyful individual might never learn from mistakes, as every setback would be perceived through a filter of delight, potentially leading to a profound lack of motivation for self-improvement or change. Conversely, imagine a life of perpetual rage. This isn't just constant irritation, it's an all-consuming fury, a state where every minor inconvenience or perceived slight escalates into intense anger. Such an existence might render societal function impossible, as interpersonal relationships would quickly devolve into conflict. Yet perhaps it could also fuel an unyielding drive for progress if directed productively, though that outcome seems unlikely given anger's typical destructive nature. The brain's reward system, usually a delicate balance of anticipation and fulfillment, would be hijacked, either overstimulated into meaninglessness by constant joy, or perpetually triggering the fight-or-flight response, leading to chronic physiological stress and exhaustion. The brain, an organ of remarkable adaptability, would inevitably recalibrate under such extreme conditions. Neuroplasticity suggests that the neural pathways associated with the singular dominant emotion would become hyper-developed, thickening and strengthening with constant use. Meanwhile, the networks typically responsible for processing other emotions would likely atrophy due to disuse, much like a limb that's never exercised, eventually losing its function. This means that even if the other emotions were theoretically reintroduced, the neurological infrastructure to process them might no longer exist. The balance of neurotransmitters would also be severely skewed. Serotonin levels might be perpetually elevated for joy, leading to a kind of constant artificial high that eventually loses its pleasurable effect. Or cortisol and adrenaline would flood the system non-stop in the case of anger. Such chemical imbalances would not just affect mood, they would impact sleep, appetite, immune function, and every other physiological process, eroding physical health. Our ability to make complex decisions, which often relies on a nuanced emotional cost-benefit analysis, would be severely compromised, as every choice would be evaluated through a single, inflexible emotional filter, potentially leading to repetitive, maladaptive behaviors. Empathy, a cornerstone of social cognition, would likewise cease to function, as understanding another's emotional state requires the capacity to mirror or simulate that feeling internally, an impossibility for a monochromatic mind. Extend this thought experiment to a global scale. What if an entire society experienced only one emotion? A collective existence defined solely by empathy, for instance, might eliminate conflict and suffering, yet it could also lead to stagnation. Without ambition, driven partly by the fear of failure or the joy of triumph, innovation might cease, as no one would feel compelled to push boundaries or compete. If everyone felt only fear, society might achieve perfect safety, driven by an overwhelming caution that prevents any risk-taking. This safety would come at the cost of all progress and exploration, trapping humanity in a perpetual state of defensive paralysis, unable to build or venture beyond their immediate fear-bound existence. Conversely, a society of pure anger would be a perpetual war zone, its structures crumbling under constant aggression, unless that anger was somehow universally channeled into battling external, non-human threats, a highly unlikely scenario. Social cues, which rely heavily on the nuanced interpretation of facial expressions, body language, and tone of voice, all colored by emotion, would become meaningless. Communication would lose its subtext, reducing interactions to purely logical or purely impulsive exchanges, stripped of depth and genuine connection. The very fabric of culture, art, and narrative, which draw their power from the full spectrum of human feeling, would be rendered incomprehensible, replaced by expressions tailored to the single dominant emotion, becoming repetitive and hollow. Emotions are not arbitrary. They are deeply functional, serving as a complex feedback system honed by evolution for survival and thriving. Fear protects us from harm, acting as an alarm system that triggers evasive action or vigilance. Sadness, despite its discomfort, facilitates processing loss, allowing for reflection and eventually adaptation, rather than simply moving on without reconciliation. Anger, when constructive, highlights injustice and motivates us to correct wrongs, serving as a potent force for change. Joy reinforces positive experiences, encouraging us to repeat behaviors beneficial for our well-being and species propagation. Even complex emotions like disgust prevent us from ingesting harmful substances or engaging in unsanitary practices, playing a vital role in health and hygiene. This intricate interplay means that no single emotion, however seemingly positive, can provide the full range of information and motivation necessary for a rich, adaptive human existence. A life constrained to one emotion is not merely limited, it represents a fundamental impairment in our ability to perceive reality accurately, make sound decisions, or connect meaningfully with the world and others. The human experience, in its fullness, demands a symphony, not a single unchanging note.